You've driven past the hollow shell of one 100 times. A row of empty storefronts, faded awnings, a clock that stopped working years ago. This used to be the center of American life, and something very specific killed it. By 2026, more than half of American small towns have a main street where at least 1 in 3 storefronts sits vacant. Your town might be one of them. But this wasn't decay, it was engineered. And the decision that started it was made not by the market, but by the federal government. To understand what was lost, you have to see what Main Street actually was. Before 1950, nearly every American town, population 5,000 or 50,000, had a dense commercial strip. Butcher, tailor, hardware man, druggist, diner, all within 2 blocks of each other, all walkable from the homes behind them. These streets weren't accidents. They were the product of a very old building pattern, the mixed-use street front. Apartments sat above the shops. The owner often lived upstairs. The street itself was a room, enclosed by buildings on both sides, human in scale, designed to be walked, not driven through. And then, in the late 1940s and 1950s, the federal government made a series of interlocking bets. The FHA, the Federal Housing Administration, began insuring mortgages almost exclusively for single-family homes built on the suburban fringe. Not for mixed-use buildings, not for Main Street apartments. The money flowed one way only. But the real reason Main Street died is stranger than just mortgage policy. The killer that most people never see is zoning, and specifically, a document written in 1926 that quietly made the American Main Street illegal, almost everywhere, for the next 100 years. In 1926, the U.S. Supreme Court upheld Euclid v. Ambler Realty, which validated use-based zoning, the idea that homes, shops, and factories must be kept in strictly separate zones. Cities and towns across America rushed to adopt it. By 1960, single-use zoning was standard everywhere. You couldn't legally build a new Main Street even if you wanted to. So the suburb and the strip mall didn't beat Main Street in a fair competition. They were mandated. The new zoning codes required setbacks. Buildings had to sit back from the street. They required parking minimums, acres of asphalt before a shop could even open. The walkable street was not just outcompeted, it was outlawed. Then came the highway. The Federal Aid Highway Act of 1956 didn't just build interstates. It built bypass routes around nearly every American small town. The through traffic that once fed Main Street's diners and hardware stores simply evaporated overnight. In thousands of towns, you can still trace the exact year the bypass opened by looking at when the storefronts went dark. But here's what makes America's story unique in the entire world. Almost no other wealthy country did this to its town centers. Walk into a small town in Germany, Japan, Italy, or even Canada, and the main street, the commercial high street, is still alive, still mixed use, still walked, because their zoning never forced the separation America did. And then the shopping mall arrived. Between 1956 and 1975, over 15,000 enclosed malls were built across the United States. Developers didn't build them downtown. Zoning and highway access made the suburban edge irresistible. The mall didn't just take Main Street's customers. It took the entire idea of a commercial gathering place and moved it behind private walls. What people forget is that the shopping mall was also briefly beloved. For a generation of Americans, it was the Main Street replacement. Weatherproof, car accessible, predictably clean. The problem was that it was private. No political protests, no street musicians, no sitting without buying. A simulation of public life with none of its rights. By the 1970s, preservationists were sounding the alarm. The National Trust for Historic Preservation launched the Main Street program in 1977, essentially a rescue operation for downtown commercial districts and small towns. It taught communities to treat their old storefronts as assets, not liabilities. In some towns, it worked. In most, it was too late. But now the story takes a turn almost nobody saw coming. The mall, the thing that was supposed to replace Main Street, is itself dying. By 2026, hundreds of enclosed malls have closed or been demolished. The retail apocalypse didn't restore Main Street. It just created a second layer of commercial ruin on top of the first. So what does a killed Main Street actually cost? It's not just nostalgia. Studies of American small towns consistently show that locally owned Main Street businesses recirculate roughly 3 times as much money within the local economy as a chain store or big box retailer. When Main Street dies, the local tax base hollows out and rarely recovers. There's a social cost too. Researchers have a term for it: third places. Not home, not work, but the barbershop, the diner, the hardware store where you ran into your neighbors. Main Street was America's third place infrastructure. When it disappeared, so did one of the primary ways Americans encountered people outside their own social circle. Now, look at this from outside America. A French or Dutch urban planner, seeing the American pattern for the first time, almost always has the same reaction: disbelief. Not that Main Streets died, but that the legal codes explicitly preventing their replacement are still on the books. In most American municipalities in 2026, you still cannot build a new Main Street by right. You'd need a variance. But something is shifting. The small number of American cities, places like Somerville in Massachusetts, Minneapolis, and Fayetteville in Arkansas, have begun rewriting their zoning codes to allow mixed-use development along commercial corridors again. They're not rebuilding Main Street, they're just making it legal to try. And in a strange twist, the towns where Main Street survived best are often the ones that were too poor or too isolated to attract the highway bypass, the mall, the big box store. Neglect was protection. Places that couldn't afford to modernize kept their bones. Some of those towns in 2026 are being discovered precisely for what they never lost. So what actually killed the American Main Street? Not Amazon, not laziness, not some inevitable force of progress. It was a specific set of policies: FHA mortgage rules that subsidized sprawl, Euclidean zoning that made density illegal, and highway funding that rerouted America around its own town centers. It was a choice, and it was made on purpose. The rest of the world didn't follow America down this road, and increasingly, a new generation of Americans is asking why their grandparents' towns had something walkable and alive that they've never experienced, and whether the codes that took it away can actually be changed. The answer, it turns out, is yes, but it requires admitting the decision was made in the first place. If you've ever stood on an empty Main Street and felt like something was missing, you were right. Subscribe for more hidden stories about how America was built and why it looks the way it does. And if you want to go deeper, watch our next video on why American cities tore out their streetcars and who paid to make it happen.